Texas, 1945. The May sun pressed down on Camp Swift like a weight, turning the dust to powder and the air to glass. A transport truck rolled through the gates, carrying 47 prisoners from the eastern camps. Among them sat a boy of 17, face gaunt, eyes hollow, hands trembling against his knees. The guards had warned the camp staff these prisoners were different from the ranch workers and farmhands they'd grown accustomed to. These came from the final collapse, from cities bombed to rubble, from hunger that had no end. The boy's name was Werner Bachmann. The truck stopped beside the processing barracks, and the prisoners climbed down slowly, uncertain on their feet. Werner moved last, his bones sharp beneath fabric that hung like a sack. Dust rose around their boots and settled again, and the Texas heat wrapped around them like a blanket made of fire. An American sergeant, clipboard in hand, studied them with an expression that wasn't quite pity, wasn't quite curiosity. Something in between. "Line up here," the sergeant said, gesturing to a spot beneath the barracks awning, where shade offered mercy from the noon glaze. Warrer stood in line. The world swayed slightly. He'd eaten nothing but watery soup and hard bread for weeks, rationed down to survival portions on the eastward journey through the collapsing Reich, then westward through the chaos of surrender, then across an ocean that had seemed endless. His stomach had forgotten what fullness felt like. His throat remembered only thirst. The processing moved methodically, names recorded, camp numbers assigned, medical checks scheduled. The sergeant's voice carried the flat efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but his eyes kept returning to the prisoners with something that looked like concern. "You boys been traveling long?" He asked no one in particular. One of the older prisoners answered in broken English, "Many weeks from the east. Before that, longer." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Well, you're here now. We'll get you fed, cleaned up, settled." Warrer barely heard the words. His attention had fixed on something else entirely, something that made his breath catch and his vision blur. Beyond the barracks, perhaps 50 yards distant, stood a water tower, tall, wooden, ordinary. But from its base ran a series of pipes, and from one of these pipes water flowed freely into a trough. Clean water, clear water, water that splashed and sparkled in the sunlight. Water that ran constantly. Water that spilled over the edges and darkened the ground beneath. Wasted water. His mind couldn't process it. In Berlin, before the city fell, water had been rationed to cupfuls per day. You washed your face in it and saved it to boil potatoes, then gave it to the animals if there were any animals left. In the camps he'd passed through during the surrender, prisoners fought over muddy puddles. On the ship across the Atlantic, fresh water came in measured portions. Never enough, always strictly controlled. But here, water ran free. More water wasted in a minute than his family had seen in a month. "Something wrong, son?" Werner jerked his attention back. The sergeant stood before him, clipboard lowered, expression gentler now. "No, sir," Werner managed in careful English. His teachers in Munich had insisted on language studies before the schools closed, before everything closed. "I am ... the water. It runs." The sergeant followed his gaze to the trough. Understanding flickered across his face. "Yeah, well, plenty of that here. You thirsty?" Vernon's throat worked, but no sound came. The sergeant turned to a guard standing nearby. "Get this boy a canteen. Actually, get all of them canteens. Fresh from the well." The guard nodded and disappeared into the barracks. The sergeant looked back at Werner, and for a moment, something passed between them. Some recognition of what the boy had survived, that statistics couldn't capture. "You'll be all right now," the sergeant said quietly. "This ain't the Eastern Front. This ain't Berlin. This is Texas, and we got more water than we know what to do with." The guard returned with an armful of canteens. He moved down the line, handing one to each prisoner. When he reached Werner, the boy took the canteen with both hands, feeling its weight, its coolness, the condensation already forming on the metal surface. "Go on," the guard said. "It's clean. Straight from the well this morning." Werner unscrewed the cap. The sound seemed impossibly loud. He lifted the canteen and the smell of clean water hit him first. Metallic and pure. Nothing like the stagnant tanks he'd drunk from for months. He tilted it back. Cold water flooded his mouth, clean and sweet and shocking. It ran down his throat, and something inside him, something that had been clenched tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there, suddenly broke open. His hands began to shake. His eyes burned. He lowered the canteen, water still dripping from his lips, and the tears came. They carved lines through the dust on his cheeks, silent at first, then accompanied by a sound he couldn't control, halfway between a gasp and a sob. He stood there in the Texas heat in the shadow of the processing barracks, holding a canteen of clean water, and wept. The other prisoners stared. The guards shifted uncomfortably. The sergeant stood very still, his clipboard forgotten at his side. "Easy now," the sergeant said softly. "Take your time." Warner couldn't stop. The tears kept coming. Months of them, years of them, all the fear and hunger and loss that he endured to survive, now rising up at the taste of clean water. His shoulders shook, his knees weakened. Another prisoner, an older man named Klaus, who'd been a shopkeeper in Hamburg, stepped close and steadied him with a hand on his elbow. "Breathe, Werner," Klaus murmured in German. "Just breathe." But Werner couldn't explain it, couldn't put words to what the water meant. It wasn't just thirst, it was the realization, sudden and overwhelming, that the nightmare might actually be over. That there might be places left in the world where water ran free, where people didn't fight over scraps, where kindness still existed in the gap between expectation and reality. He'd been told Americans were monsters, brutal conquerors who showed no mercy. The propaganda had painted them as devils in uniform, destroyers of culture, enemies of civilization itself. But here stood a sergeant who'd seen his thirst and offered water. Here stood guards who looked uncomfortable at his tears, not amused. Here stood a camp where water ran freely from pipes, wasted on troughs, abundant beyond imagining. The cognitive dissonance nearly broke him again. "All right," the sergeant said, his voice firmer now, pulling Werner back from the edge. "Let's get you boys to the barracks. Medical checks can wait. You need food, sleep, and showers." In that order. Showers. The word hung in the air like a promise. Werner had not properly bathed in 4 months. The last shower had been in Nuremberg before the final American advance, a trickle of cold water shared by 30 men. Before that, in Berlin, his mother had heated water over a fire made from broken furniture, and he'd washed from a bowl while shells fell in the distance. They walked across the camp compound, their boots raising small clouds of dust. Werner noticed things in fragments, details his mind could barely process. Guard towers, yes, but the guards weren't watching the prisoners with rifles raised. They leaned against railings, smoking, talking amongst themselves. The barracks weren't crumbling shelters, but solid wooden structures with actual roofs. Actual windows with glass still intact. In the distance, other prisoners moved freely, some playing cards beneath a tree, others tossing a ball back and forth. It looked almost peaceful, like a military camp, not a punishment. The sergeant led them to a long building at the camp's eastern edge. "This is Processing Block B. You'll stay here tonight, get cleaned up, see the doc. Then tomorrow we'll assign you to regular barracks and work details." He pushed open the door and cooler air rushed out. Inside the space was divided into 2 sections. A large open room with cuts lined up in rows. And beyond that, through another doorway, the unmistakable sight of shower stalls. "Showers first," the sergeant decided. "You boys look like you need it. There's soap in there, towels, clean uniforms after. Take your time. Water won't run out." Werner moved with the others toward the shower room, his legs carrying him forward automatically, while his mind struggled to catch up. The room was tiled, white and clean with 10 shower heads arranged along the walls. A guard demonstrated the handles, turning them to show how hot and cold water mixed. "Careful with the temperature," he warned. "You haven't had a hot shower in a while. Don't burn yourselves trying to make up for it all at once." The prisoners undressed slowly, piling their filthy clothes in a corner. Warner's uniform was more patches than original fabric, stained with mud and sweat and things he tried not to remember. He folded it carefully anyway, habit from years of military discipline, then stepped toward the nearest shower. The tile felt cold beneath his feet. He reached for the handle, turned it, and water burst forth. Hot water. Steam rose immediately, filling the room with warmth and moisture. Vernon stepped under the stream, and the sensation nearly dropped him to his knees. Heat, cleanliness, water that ran and didn't stop. He stood there letting it pour over his head, his shoulders, his back, washing away months of grime and fear. Soap sat in a dish on the wall. Actual soap that smelled like something clean and normal. He elthered it in his hands, scrubbed his skin, watched the water at his feet turn gray with dirt. Around him, the other prisoners did the same. Some stood motionless under the spray, eyes closed, faces lifted toward the ceiling. Others scrubbed vigorously, as if they could wash away everything that had happened. Klaus, the shopkeeper from Hamburg, leaned against the tile wall and quietly wept, his tears mixing with the shower water. Invisible. No one spoke. There were no words adequate for what they felt. Vernon washed his hair 3 times, working the soap through the matted strands until they felt like hair again instead of straw. He scrubbed his scalp, his neck, behind his ears, places that had itched for weeks. The hot water beat down on his shoulders, and for the first time since capture, possibly for the first time since his father had left for the Eastern Front 3 years ago, Werner felt something like safety. The propaganda had said nothing about this. Nothing about American camps with hot showers and soap and water that didn't stop. Nothing about guards who looked at starving boys with concern instead of contempt. Nothing about sergeants who offered canteens to prisoners who stood trembling in the Texas heat. He thought of his mother in Berlin, if she was still alive, if the apartment still stood. If his sister Greta had survived the final siege. They'd been separated when the Russians entered from the east and chaos swallowed everything. Vernon had been conscripted at 16, given a rifle he barely knew how to use. Sent to hold a position against Americans who swept through like a force of nature. He'd surrendered within a week, hands raised high, expecting execution. Instead, they'd given him water. The shower ran for 15 minutes, 20, half an hour. No one told them to hurry. No one rationed the time. Finally, reluctantly, Werner turned off the handle. The sudden silence felt strange. He stood dripping on the tile, cleaner than he'd been in months, warmer than he'd been since before winter, and the tears threatened to return. Towels on the bench, a guard called from the doorway. Clean uniforms, too. Take what fits. Vernon dried himself with a towel that smelled like laundry soap. A scent that transported him instantly to his mother's kitchen to Saturday mornings, when she'd a hang wash on the line, and the whole apartment smelled like clean cotton. He'd forgotten that smell existed. Forgotten that normal life had included such simple, beautiful things. The clean uniform was American-made sturdy denim, marked with PW on the back. It fit reasonably well, baggy in places where Vernon had lost weight, but comfortable. Clang, he rolled up the sleeves, buttoned the shirt, and looked at himself in a small mirror mounted on the wall. A stranger stared back. A thin boy with hollow cheeks and 2 old eyes, but clean, dressed in clothes without holes or stains, almost human again. The mess hall came next. The sergeant led them across the compound as evening began to settle, the Texas heat finally releasing its grip, the sky turning orange and purple over the western horizon. Other prisoners sat outside their barracks talking quietly, some playing harmonas, others reading books or writing letters. "We got about 800 men here at Swift," the sergeant explained as they walked. "Most been here 6 months or more. They work the local farms, help with construction. Some of them do carpentry or mechanical work in town. You'll get assigned based on your skills and health status." Warner listened, but didn't absorb much. His attention had fixed on the mess hall ahead, a long building from which warm light and the smell of cooking food emerged. His stomach, empty for so long it had stopped sending hunger signals, suddenly woke up and cramped painfully. Inside the mess hall stretched longer than seemed possible. Long tables filled the space and prisoners sat eating, talking, their voices creating a low hum of conversation that felt almost normal. At the far end, American cooks worked behind serving counters, filling plates with food that made Werner's knees weak. "Line up here," the sergeant said. "Take a tray, go down the line. They'll serve you. Eat slow." Your stomach's probably forgotten what to do with real food. Vernon took a metal tray, hands shaking slightly, and joined the line. As he shuffled forward, he watched the men ahead of him receive portions that seemed impossible. Meat. Actual meat in thick slices. Potatoes, not the rotten ones he'd eaten in Berlin, but golden and whole. Bread, fresh and soft. Vegetables and colors he'd forgotten existed. Milk in glass bottles. When he reached the front, an American cook, a large man with a stained apron and kind eyes, looked at him and smiled. New arrival, huh? You look like you could use seconds before you even start firsts. Vernon didn't understand all the words, but he understood the tone. The cook loaded his plate with more food than Warner had seen in a single meal since before the war. 2 pieces of meatloaf, a mountain of mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, fresh bread with butter, a glass of milk, and a piece of apple pie. Go on now, the cook said. Find a seat. Eat up. Vernon carried his tray like it was made of glass, terrified he'd drop it, that this would turn out to be a dream. He found a spot at a table near the window and sat down carefully. Around him, the other new arrivals did the same, all of them staring at their plates with expressions of disbelief. Klaus, sitting across from Wormer, picked up his fork and set it down, then picked it up again. I can't, he whispered in German. If I eat this, I'll be sick. Eat slow, Vernon said, though he felt the same fear. Small bites. He cut a piece of meatloaf, lifted it to his mouth, and tasted flavors he'd forgotten existed. Salt. Fat. Actual meat that wasn't gristle or organ meat or stretched with sawdust. He chewed slowly, forcing himself not to devour it, and swallowed. His stomach accepted it. He took another bite, then another. The potatoes melted on his tongue. The gravy was rich and warm and perfect. The bread was soft, the butter real. He drank the milk in small sips, feeling it coat his throat, tasting sweetness he hadn't experienced in years. Halfway through the meal, Vernon had to stop. Not because he was full, his stomach could have taken more, but because the emotions overwhelmed him again. He set down his fork, covered his face with his hands, and breaths slowly, fighting back tears for the second time that day. Across the mess hall, the sergeant watched the new arrivals with an expression that was hard to read. He'd processed hundreds of prisoners, maybe thousands, but something about this group affected him differently. Maybe it was how young they were, most of them barely, old enough to shave. Maybe it was how thin, how broken, how utterly shocked by simple kindness. Later that evening, after the meal, after the new arrivals had been assigned cuts in the processing barracks, after the lights had been dimmed, and most of the men had collapsed into sleep, Vernon lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cot had an actual mattress, thin, but present. He had a pillow, a blanket that smelled clean, a roof over his head that didn't leak. Through the window he could see stars emerging in the darkening Texas sky, bright and clear in the dry air. He thought about the water, about stepping off that transport truck, seeing water running freely from a pipe, so much water wasted on a trough that the ground beneath it had turned to mud. About the canteen in his hands, cool and full, the taste of clean water flooding his mouth. About standing in that hot shower, letting water run over his body for 30 minutes straight, using soap like it was abundant, like there would always be more. In Berlin, his mother had saved dishwater to water the window plants. In the camps he'd passed through, men had died fighting over drinking water contaminated with disease. On the transport ship, sailors had threatened punishment for anyone caught wasting a drop from their daily ration. But here in Texas, at Camp Swift, water ran free. It was the smallest thing and the largest thing. It meant that somewhere in the world, despite everything that had happened, despite all the destruction and death and hatred, there were still places where basic abundance existed, where people didn't have to fight to survive, where guards brought canteens of cold water to thirsty prisoners without being asked. That propaganda had been wrong. Not just wrong, but utterly, completely opposite to reality. Americans weren't monsters. This camp wasn't a torture facility. The treatment wasn't brutal. It was, if anything, more humane than what Warrer had experienced from his own side in the final months of the war. That realization hurt in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It meant everything he'd been taught, everything he believed, everything his country had told him about the world had been lies. Comfortable lies that made fighting easier, that made the enemy seem less than human, but lies nonetheless. He turned on his side, pulling the clean blanket up to his chin. In the darkness, other prisoners shifted and murmured in their sleep. Someone cried out briefly, trapped in a nightmare, then fell silent again. Klaus in the cot beside Warrers breathed slowly and steadily finally at peace after months of running and hiding and barely surviving. Tomorrow the sergeant had said they'd be assigned to regular barracks and work details. Vernon didn't know what that meant exactly. Would they work the farms like the other prisoners? Would they build things, repair roads? He found he didn't care much. Whatever the work, it would be done in a place where water ran freely, where food came in portions that could actually satisfy hunger, where guards treated prisoners like humans instead of animals. That was enough, more than enough. Dawn came early in Texas, the sun climbing over the horizon like it had urgent business, turning the sky from purple to pink to blazing orange. Vernon woke to the sound of a bell ringing across the compound, calling the camp to breakfast. Around him, the other new arrivals stirred, groaning, disoriented, slowly remembering where they were. The processing barracks had actual windows, and through them Ware could see prisoners already moving about outside, heading toward the mess hall, talking and laughing like this was any normal morning in any normal place. It seemed impossible. They were prisoners of war, held behind fences and guard towers thousands of miles from home, but they laughed. Up and at him, a guard called from the doorway. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Medical checks after. Let's move." Warner dressed in yesterday's clean uniform, still amazed by how it didn't smell, didn't have holes, fit his body like clothing was supposed to. The other men moved slowly, stiff from sleeping on actual mattresses after months of wooden boards or bare ground, or nothing at all. In the washroom attached to the barracks, they found more impossibilities. Running water at sinks, mirrors, toothbrushes, and tooth powder set out in neat rows. Vernon brushed his teeth for the first time in months. The mint taste sharp and clean. He splashed water on his face, combed his hair with a comb from the communal basket, and looked at himself in the mirror again. Still thin, still hollow-eyed, but cleaner, more human, almost like the boy who'd left Munich 3 years ago before everything changed. Breakfast in the Messal was as overwhelming as dinner had been. Eggs, bacon, toast, oatmeal, fruit, coffee that was actually hot and didn't taste like burnt grain. Warner ate carefully, his stomach still adjusting to the concept of regular meals. Around him, other prisoners, the ones who'd been at Swift for months, ate casually, talking about their work assignments, complaining about the heat, discussing letters they'd received from home. Letters from home. Vernon hadn't thought to ask about mail. Did they allow it? Could he write to his mother? If she was alive, if the apartment still stood, if the postal system functioned at all in Berlin's ruins. After breakfast, the medical checks. A camp doctor, middle-aged with gentle hands and tired eyes, examined each new arrival thoroughly. He checked their weight, looked at their teeth, listened to their hearts and lungs, asked questions about injuries or illness. When Werner's turn came, the doctor studied him for a long moment before speaking. "How old are you, son?" 17, sir." "Jesus," the doctor muttered, making a note on his clipboard. 17. You look about 12. How much did you weigh before the war? Wner tried to remember. Perhaps 140 lb, 63 kilo. The doctor made another note. You're 98 lb right now. We need to get about 40 lb back on you before you're anywhere near healthy. I'm putting you on limited work duty, mostly indoor tasks, nothing physically demanding until we get some meat on those bones. 98 lb. Vernon had known he'd lost weight, but hearing the number spoken aloud made it real. He'd lost a third of his body mass. No wonder the clean uniform hung on him like a tent. "You'll also see the dentist this week," the doctor continued. "Looks like you've got some cavities that need attention, and I'm prescribing extra rations for the next month. You'll eat 4 times a day instead of 3, and the cooks know to give you larger portions. Your body needs fuel to rebuild. Extra rations, larger portions. Werner nodded, unable to speak. In Germany, extra rations meant an additional slice of bread, maybe a potato. Here, apparently, it meant being required to eat more food than you already couldn't quite believe was real. The doctor smiled slightly, as if he could read Werner's thoughts. I know it seems like a lot, but trust me, son. Your body will thank you. You've been through hell. Now you get to recover. That afternoon, Wiener and the other new arrivals were moved to permanent barracks. Block 7 on the southern edge of the compound housed about 60 prisoners in 2 long rooms lined with CS. Vernon was assigned a cot near the window with a small locker for his possessions, though he had no possessions except the clothes he wore. The prisoners in Block 7 were mostly his age, late teens to early 20s. Conscripts like himself who'd been captured in the war's final months. They greeted the new arrivals with a mix of curiosity and sympathy, recognizing immediately that these men came from harder places. "Where were you captured?" one asked Werner in German. A boy named Friedrich, who'd been at Swift for 3 months. "Outside Ain," Warner answered, "last November." Friedrich nodded. "I surrendered near Cologne. Best decision I ever made. You'll see. This place is not what they told us. I'm beginning to understand that. Wait until you see the town." Friedrich continued, warming to his subject. "Some of us get to go to Bastrop on weekends, work at farms, or help in shops. The locals, they're kind. They feed us, give us cigarettes, treat us like people. I worked at a garage last month, helping fix tractors, and the owner's wife made me sandwiches for lunch. Real sandwiches, Werner. Ham and cheese and lettuce." Werner tried to imagine it, but couldn't quite. The idea of prisoners being allowed into town, of working alongside civilians, of being fed by the enemy's families. It contradicted everything he'd been taught. "They're not the enemy," Friedrich said as if reading his mind. "I mean, technically they are. The war is not over yet. But here in this place, nobody treats it that way. The guards, they're just guys doing a job. Some of them are nice, some are bored, but none are cruel. And the work, it's real work, not punishment. You'll see." That evening, Werner sat outside the barracks as the sun set, watching the camp settle into twilight. Other prisoners played cards at nearby tables, their German voices mixing with occasional English from passing guards. A harmonica played somewhere, a melancholy tune that reminded Werner of home. A prisoner named Otto, who'd been at Swift since early 1944, sat down beside him on the wooden bench. Otto was older, maybe 30, with a carpenter's hands and a steady, calm presence. "First day is always the hardest," Otto said in German. "Not because the camp's hard, because your mind can't accept that it's not." Werner nodded. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to take away the food, the water, the clean clothes won't happen. This is how it is every day. They treat us better than our own forces treated us half the time." Otto pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Werner. When Warrer declined, Otto lit his own and exhaled slowly. "I fought in Poland, France, Russia. 3 years on the Eastern Front. When I finally got captured, I expected execution or torture or starvation. Instead, I got this. Hot showers, regular meals, work that pays in camp script, letters from home. It broke something in me. That kindness broke all the propaganda in my head." "What do you do for work?" Warner asked. "Carpentry mostly. Building furniture, repairing structures. Last month I helped build a school in Bastrop. A school Vernon for American children, and the town's people thanked me, shook my hand. One woman gave me cookies her daughter had baked." Vernon stared at the darkening sky. "I don't understand how this is possible." After everything that happened, after what Germany did, Otto was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they're showing us there's another way. That you don't have to match cruelty with cruelty. That even enemies can be human to each other." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Or maybe I'm thinking too much. Maybe they're just decent people who happen to have a different flag." Vernon settled into the rhythm of Camp Swift with a mixture of relief and continuing disbelief. His work assignment, as the doctor had prescribed, was light duty in the camp library, a small building filled with books in German and English newspapers from before the war, and writing materials for prisoners who wanted to send letters home. The library was run by an American corporal named Jenkins, a former teacher from Ohio, who spoke passable German and treated the prisoners like students rather than enemies. He taught Warrer how to catalog books, how to help other prisoners find reading material, how to write properly addressed letters that might actually reach Germany through the Red Cross. "Mail's slow," Jenkins explained, "and a lot doesn't get through, but some does. Worth trying." Vernon wrote to his mother that first week carefully, knowing the letter would be censored, knowing it might never arrive. He described the camp in vague terms, the weather, the work, the kindness, and asked if she and Greta were safe. He didn't mention the water or the food or how he'd cried. Those details felt too raw, too personal, too likely to be misunderstood. The weight came back slowly. Dr. Morrison checked him weekly, pleased by the steady gain. 98 lb became 105, then 112. Vernon's face filled out slightly. The hollows beneath his eyes became less pronounced. His ribs stopped showing through his shirt. The extra rations helped. 4 meals a day, generous portions, food that was fresh and plentiful, and nothing like the starvation diet he'd survived on for months. His body, starved for so long, absorbed everything gratefully. He could feel himself getting stronger, could climb the library ladder without getting dizzy, could work a full day without exhaustion. But the psychological weight took longer to shift. Vernon still started awake some nights, heart pounding, convinced the camp was a dream, and he'd wake back in the bomb ruins of Berlin. He still caught himself hoarding food at meals, hiding bread in his pockets, unable to trust that tomorrow's breakfast would actually come. He still felt a jolt of fear whenever a guard approached, despite months of evidence that they meant no harm. Otto told him this was normal. "The body heals faster than the mind," he said. "Give it time." Summer deepened. The Texas heat became a constant companion, relentless and dry, turning the campgrounds to dust by midday. Prisoners worked in the early morning and late afternoon when the temperature was bearable, resting during the hottest hours. Vernon spent those midday hours in the relative cool of the library, reading books in English to improve his language skills, writing letters home that might never arrive, talking with other prisoners who came seeking escape and stories. One afternoon in June, Jenkins brought in a photograph and a box of records. "Thought you boys might like some music," he said. "Got some German composers here. Beethoven batch a little Mozart." He put on Beethoven's Length, and the library filled with the familiar strains of the symphony Warner had heard 1,000 times in Munich concert halls before the war. The music hit him like a physical force. Memories flooding back so vividly he had to sit down. His father taking him to concerts, his mother humming melodies while cooking, Greta playing piano in their apartment. Badly but enthusiastically. All of it gone now. The concert halls bombed, the apartment possibly destroyed, his father dead in Russia. He was certain of that even though no official notice had come. Greta somewhere in Berlin's ruins if she'd survived. And Wheeler here in Texas listening to German music played by an American corporal who thought prisoners might like something familiar. A kindness hurt more than cruelty would have. Cruelty he could understand, could armor against, could survive through anger and defiance. But this gentleness, this casual humanity, this refusal to treat him as anything less than a person deserving of music and books and clean water, it undid him. Jenkins noticed the tears, but said nothing. Just let the music play. By July, Vernon had gained 20 lb and could work full days without difficulty. Dr. Morrison, pleased with his progress, cleared him for outdoor labor if he wanted it. Vernon requested farm work, wanting to be outside, wanting to do something with his hands beyond cataloging books. He was assigned to a dairy farm 10 miles from camp, owned by a man named Mallister, who had been taking prisoner labor for over a year. Each morning, a truck carried Vernon and 5 other prisoners to the farm, returning them to camp each evening. The work was hard but satisfying. Milking cows, making stalls, repairing fences, harvesting feed. Mallister was a gruff man in his 50s, weathered by decades of Texas sun, but fair in his treatment. He showed them how he wanted things done, worked alongside them when the labor was heavy, and never raised his voice in anger. His wife brought lunch to the fields at noon. Sandwiches and lemonade and cookies, always enough for everyone, including the prisoners. "You boys work hard," Mallister said one day, watching Warner repair a section of fence with practice efficiency. "Harder than some of the locals I've hired." "Where'd you learn carpentry?" "My grandfather," Warner answered in careful English. "He was a craftsman in Munich. Taught me some skills before the war." Mallister nodded. "Shows that's good work there." A compliment simple and genuine meant more than word could express. To be seen as skilled, as competent, as someone whose work had value, it was a kind of recognition he had unexperienced since before conscription, when he'd been a person rather than a soldier or a prisoner. The farm became a kind of sanctuary. Out there among the cattle and the endless Texas grasslands, the war seemed distant and unreal. The work was honest, the treatment fair, and Mrs. McCoysterer's lemonade on hot afternoons tasted like something from a peaceful world that might still exist somewhere. One evening in late August, as the truck carried them back to camp, Friedrich turned to Ver with a thoughtful expression. "You know what I realized today? I forgot I was a prisoner just for a few hours, working on that tractor engine, talking with the mechanic about compression ratios. I completely forgot." Warner understood. He'd had similar moments at the farm. Times when the work absorbed him so completely that his identity as prisoner, as German, as enemy, all faded into irrelevance. He was just a person fixing a fence, milking a cow, carrying hay. Just weren't doing work that mattered in a place that felt almost like home. "Do you think we'll go back?" Friedrich asked quietly. "After the war ends to Germany eventually," Warner said. "There's nothing else. My family is there if they're alive. But what if Germany is gone? Not just destroyed, but gone. What if there's nothing to go back to?" Vernon didn't have an answer. The question haunted him in his quieter moments, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come and his mind turned to Berlin's ruins. What if his mother and sister were dead? What if the apartment had been bombed to rubble? What if Munich, the city of his childhood, had been reduced to burned shells of buildings and streets full of ghosts? What then? "We rebuild," Otto said from across the truck. He'd been listening quietly. "Germany will exist again someday. Different, maybe, but still there. And we'll go back and help rebuild it. That's what we do." "Rebuild it how?" Friedrich challenged. "Into what?" "The Germany I knew is dead." "Into something better," Otto said firmly. "A Germany that doesn't start wars, that doesn't teach children to hate, that treats people like people regardless of what flag they salute. Maybe that Germany can be worth saving." Vernon wanted to believe that, wanted to imagine a future where Germany rose from its ashes into something new and better. But the vision felt fragile, easily shattered by memories of what had been done, what had been believed, how thoroughly the old Germany had failed. The war in Europe had ended in May, though news traveled slowly to Camp Swift, and the prisoners had heard about it in fragments. Rumors and official announcements mixing into a blur of relief and uncertainty. Germany had surrendered. The regime had fallen. Cities lay in ruins across Europe. Millions were dead. The numbers were too large to comprehend. In the camp, life continued much as before. The prisoners remained prisoners. The work continued. The routines persisted. Legal technicalities and logistical challenges meant repatriation would take time, possibly years. Vernon tried not to think about it too much, tried to focus on the present. The work in McAllister's farm, the books in the library, the slow rebuilding of his body and mind. In September, a letter arrived. The first communication from home since his capture nearly a year ago. Jenkins brought it to the library one afternoon, handing it to Wormer with a gentle expression that suggested he'd read enough P-mail to know what emotions this would trigger. "From Germany," Jenkins said simply. "Take your time." Warner's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside a single page, his mother's handwriting, slightly shaky, but unmistakably hers. He sat down and read, "My dearest Warner, we received your letter from the Red Cross 3 weeks ago. I cannot express the relief of knowing you are alive and well. Greta and I are surviving. The apartment was damaged but not destroyed. We have 2 rooms left habitable. Food is scarce, but we manage. The city is in ruins, Warner. Everything you remember is gone or changed beyond recognition. I am grateful you are where you are. The stories from other camps from the east are horrific. That you have food and shelter and kind treatment is a mercy I prayed for but hardly dared hope to receive. Your father's death was confirmed in April. He fell near Stalingrad in late 1943. Official notice came through months late. I had known in my heart, but the confirmation still broke something in me. He would be glad to know you survived, Warner, that you are safe. We do not know when you will return home. Part of me is selfish and wants you here immediately. Another part is grateful you remain in America where there is food and water and buildings that still have roofs. Berlin is a graveyard, my son, a living haunted more than the dead. Write when you can know that we think of you always, that we wait for you, that we love you. Your mother, Werner, read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket close to his heart. His father was dead. He'd known, had suspected, but the confirmation carved out a hollow space in his chest that nothing could fill. His mother and Greta were alive, but struggling. Berlin was ruins, and he was here, safe, fed, healthy, guilty. That evening, he sat outside the barracks as the sun set, watching the sky turn purple and gold, and let himself feel everything. Grief for his father. Relief that his mother and Greta survived. Guilt that he had food while they scraped by on rations. Gratitude that he wasn't in Berlin's ruins. Confusion about what his future held. Otto joined him eventually, saying nothing, just sitting in companionable silence. After a long while, he spoke. "Letter from home?" Werner nodded. "Bad news? My father is dead. Stalingrad almost 2 years ago." Otto was quiet. "I'm sorry. My mother and sister are alive, though, in Berlin. The apartment still partially stands. That's something. She said Berlin is a graveyard, that she's glad I'm here instead of there." Otto nodded slowly. "My wife wrote something similar. Dresden was completely destroyed. She and the children are living in a village outside the city in a barn converted to shelter. But they're alive and fed, and she's grateful I'm not there to see what happened to our home." They sat in silence as darkness fell. 2 men thousands of miles from their destroyed country. Prisoners in a land that treated them with more kindness than their own nation had shown in its final days. "What do we do with this?" Werner asked eventually. "This guilt, this confusion." "We live," Otto said. "We survive. We become better than what we were. And when we finally go home, we help build something better than what was destroyed. That's all we can do." October brought cooler weather, a relief after Texas summer's brutal heat. Werner had gained 35 lebo and looked almost healthy again. His face filled out, his eyes clearer, his strength returned. The work at McAllister's farm continued, and Werner had become skilled enough that Mallister joked about hiring him permanently after the war. "Of course, you'd have to stay in America," Mallister said one afternoon. "Leave Germany behind. Some of you boys might consider it." Werner didn't know how to respond. The idea of staying in America, of not returning to Germany, felt like a betrayal of his family. But the idea of returning to Berlin's ruins, of trying to rebuild a life in a city that had become a graveyard, filled him with dread. That evening, back at camp, Werner joined a discussion in the barracks about repatriation. Most prisoners wanted to go home despite the destruction, despite the hardship. But others, particularly those who'd lost everything, who had no family waiting, who saw no future in Germany's ashes, were considering other options. "America needs farmers," one prisoner named Martin said. "Needs skilled workers. They might let some of us stay if we apply for residency." "That's desertion," Friedrich argued. "Great is our country. We have a duty to help rebuild it." "Germany betrayed us," Martin countered. "The regime lied to us, used us, destroyed our country. I don't owe loyalty to ashes and graves." The argument went in circles, as it had for weeks, each man wrestling with impossible choices. Werner listened, but didn't participate. He didn't know what he wanted. Some days he dreamed of returning to Munich, of finding his mother and sister, of helping rebuild. Other days he imagined staying in Texas, working on a farm, building a life in a place where water ran freely and kindness was common. A few weeks later, Jenkins called Werner into the library office. "Got something to show you?" he said, pulling out a folder. "Been working on this for a while. Educational program for prisoners who want to learn trades or prepare for university when they return home. Thought you might be interested." Inside the folder were curricula for carpentry, mechanics, agriculture, even college preparatory courses in literature and mathematics. The camp administration approved it last month. We'll start classes in January. Figured you boys should have something to do besides work and wait. Might as well learn something useful. Werner stared at the papers. "You're teaching us even though we're prisoners. Even though the war just ended." Jenkins shrugged. "War is over. You boys are going home eventually. Might as well go home with skills that'll help you rebuild. That's what America does, Werner. We win wars, then we help our enemies recover. Marshall Plan's already being discussed for Europe. Millions in aid to help Germany and Japan rebuild. We'd rather have prosperous democracies than bitter, destroyed enemies." It was too much. Werner sat down heavily, the papers trembling in his hands. "I don't understand your country. I expected punishment. Instead, I got kindness, expected starvation, got abundance, expected cruelty, got education. That's what separates us," Jen said quietly. "Not that we're perfect, we're not got plenty of our own problems, but we believe in second chances, in rehabilitation over revenge, in the possibility that former enemies can become future friends." He paused. "Your generation didn't start this war, Werner. You were children when it began. You got conscripted, propagandized, used as cannon fodder. That's not your fault. What you do after, how you rebuild, what Germany becomes next, that's on you and your generation." Werner thought about that conversation for days. Thought about it during work at the farm, during quiet evenings in the library, during sleepless nights when memories of Berlin competed with visions of a possible future. He thought about the moment almost 6 months ago, when he'd stepped off that transport truck and seen water running freely from a pipe. How it had seemed impossible. How he'd cried while drinking clean water from a canteen. How that single moment had begun breaking down everything he'd been taught about America, about enemies, about the world. That water hadn't just quenched his thirst. It had started washing away the lies. December arrived, bringing a different kind of cold to Texas. Mild by German standards, but enough to require jackets and to make the prisoners grateful for heated barracks. Werner had been at Camp Swift for 7 months now, and the camp had become impossibly familiar. Home almost in a way that felt like betrayal of his real home, but couldn't be denied. The educational program had started. Werner was taking courses in advanced English, carpentry, and agriculture. He discovered he had a talent for teaching as well, helping other prisoners with their English homework, explaining concepts in German that Jenkins struggled to communicate. Another letter arrived from his mother in late December. She and Greta had moved to a cousin's farm outside Berlin, where food was more available and the destruction less total. They were surviving, even finding small joys in the daily work of farming. She asked about his life, but didn't demand his immediate return. "Come home when you can," she wrote. "But come home healthy, skilled, ready to build something new. Germany needs strong young men who can help it rise again." Christmas in the camp was strange and beautiful. The American guards decorated a tree in the mess hall, and someone found a box of ornaments that the prisoners hung while singing German Christmas carols. The cooks prepared a feast. Turkey, ham, potatoes, pie, everything abundant and generous. Jenkins gave out books as gifts, individually selected for each prisoner based on their interests and language skills. Werner received a copy of The Grapes of Wrath in English, with a note from Jenkins. "Thought you might appreciate a story about survival during hard times. Your English is good enough for this now. Proud of your progress." That night, Werner sat in the barracks reading by lamplight, while around him, other prisoners wrote letters, played cards, talked quietly about home and future and hope. Outside, Texas stars blazed in a clear sky, bright and cold and beautiful. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the war, the capture, the months of hunger and fear, about stepping off a truck and seeing water run free, about crying while drinking clean water, while standing in a hot shower while eating real food, about the gradual realization that everything he'd been taught was a lie, about the Americans who could have been cruel but chose kindness instead, the sergeant who offered cantons, the doctor who prescribed extra rations, the mealisters who shared lunch and treated him with dignity, Jenkins who gave books and education and hoped for a future beyond prison camps and war's wreckage. Vernon had expected monsters and found humans, had expected punishment and found rehabilitation, had expected to die and instead learned how to live again. The clean water had been the beginning. That simple, impossible abundance. Water running free from a pipe wasted on troughs given freely to thirsty prisoners had cracked open everything, had shown him that the world didn't have to be a zero-sum game of cruelty and survival, that there were places where basic human kindness still existed, that former enemies could treat each other with dignity and respect. He would return to Germany eventually, would help rebuild his country, would find his mother and sister, would work to create something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. But he would carry Texas with him, would carry the memory of clean water, hot showers, abundant food, and Americans who chose humanity over hatred. That was the victory he realized. Not military conquest or political dominance, but the slow, patient work of showing prisoners that another way was possible. That societies could be built on abundance instead of scarcity, on cooperation instead of competition, on second chances instead of revenge. Germany had lost the war with weapons, but America was winning the peace with water, with kindness, with the radical act of treating the conquered with basic human decency. Vernon closed his book and looked around the barracks. At Otto, writing another letter to his wife. At Friedrich, teaching himself mechanical engineering from a borrowed textbook. At Klaus, the shopkeeper from Hamburg, learning carpentry so he could rebuild his destroyed store. At Martin, who decided to stay in America and was working on citizenship papers. All of them transformed by this place, not broken by it, but healed, changed by the simple act of being treated like human beings deserving of food, water, shelter, education, and hope. The propaganda had prepared them for annihilation. America had given them second chances instead. Vernon thought he was beginning to understand why. Outside the Texas night was clear and cold. Inside the barracks was warm, safe, full of men rebuilding their lives from catastrophe's ruins. And somewhere in Germany, his mother and sister survived, waiting for his return, ready to build a better country from the ashes of the old. The clean water had shown him it was possible. Everything else would follow from that.